It is 3/9 of 2015. Alexander Kojeve is well into volume 2 right now, which is his articulation of the sphere of right and externality, which is the second volume of his phenomenology of right. The first volume represented his theory of right, and now he's showing how the theory of right is incarnated in the sphere of right in externality or actuality. We've looked at key terminology like dunamis and energia. We've looked at the hierarchy of structure, and we've tried to remain within the realm of self-consciousness, even though sometimes Kojeve passes through some very difficult logic. And I think he realizes himself. In this section, he actually pauses for a moment to give us a moment to form a thought picture of taking our bearings again, kind of get centered on the task at hand, and understanding that Kojeve wants to write about a speech act, that his phenomenology of right is all about language. It's all about a speech act. It's all about speaking that which has developed and reached fruition in self-consciousness. Once the self-consciousness has refined itself and reached an articulation of right, then it wants to move on to the speech act, and that is the speech act of positing. So within this sphere of right, in this lesson, Kojeve tells us that the speech act is performed by government. And he wants to point out the role of government now and show us how it fits into a phenomenology. How can concrete government fit within a phenomenology of right? How can we read Kojeve as a phenomenology and understand this concrete institution of government? He wants to clarify that for us. It'll be a very brief lesson, but it's just to form a thought picture. The first moment is the state judicial validation of writing the Speech Act for government. The state writes the Speech Act. The principle of right that underlies the Speech Act is the ideal of justice. Kojeve has said that all along, all the way through Volume 1. He talked about the ideal of justice. This principle is applied to social interactions and, of course, their modalities in order to articulate the right that asks to be spoken. It's a dynamic process because it takes place in space and time. Therefore, even the ideal of justice is going to evolve and change. It's going to be an evolving ideal. Now, the realized right within the state can exist as two terms that we've discussed before: the actuality of energia, or the potentiality of dunamis. So realized right exists as energia or dunamis, but they both ask to be spoken. Now, any autonomous singularity of society and its sign of right, like we discussed last time, is absorbed into the state as a part of the potential state dunamis or as part of the sanctioned state energia. And that constitutes the juridically validated right that asks to be spoken. And so now Kojeve wants to get into government because government performs the Speech Act. So government is organized into and enclosed within the state. It's the state that encloses government. Government doesn't enclose the state. The state encloses government. So government is organized into the state and enclosed within the state. Now, government can end up limiting itself if it doesn't fully integrate the state's dunamis and energy of right. If it doesn't fully integrate that which is valid, it can end up limiting itself and being an imperfect government. And so it can limit itself as far as its integration of that which is judicially valid. But government is the institution that represents the state in all outside relations. It draws the limit point of friendship. But governmental right does exist in actuality. Key point for Kojeve, however, is note 4. The government can only promulgate the state's right. It's the speaker, it's the Speech Act. The state's right as a speak the right and make it known as law. So that's the role of government. It speaks the right, makes it known as law, but it can only speak that which is deemed as juridically valid as effective state-sanctioned right. That's the key underlying reality here, that we begin with effective state-sanctioned right that is juridically valid to be spoken. And in the government, if it's a fully integrated government with the content of a judicial valid right, it will speak the right of the state, but it might speak a limited version of that if it hasn't fully integrated all that is judicially valid within the state. So the government merely promulgates the state's right. It has to speak only what is judicially valid and offer to it as the writing of the Speech Act that asks to be spoken. So the government finds itself constantly under revision. So the third moment is all about revision. The revision of the Speech Act within the state. Now the goal of the right is to reach absolute right. That's Hegel, of course, and Kojeve. That will occur at the end of history after the idea of justice has been worked out completely to create a homogeneous state of social interactions. So absolute right is going to be at the end of all that positing and return work, positing of the notion, return out of actuality back into self-consciousness, again and again and again, the continual loops, loop after loop after loop, until it reaches a highly ideal state of a homogeneous state of social interactions according to right. That's the Hegelian view. Now the governmental promulgation of right is continually under the force of revision. The state's right in potentiality, or for Kojeve, the concept of dunamis, continuously critiques the governmental promulgating speech. So good old dunamis, which is power, but it's the power of the potentiality of right. The dunamis power of potentiality of right is the critique force that is continually critiquing the governmental promulgating speech. But critique does come from actuality also, because Kojeve tells us that critique comes from state-sanctioned energia in actuality, as well as state plurality of rights as dunamis. The potential right is a plurality that has not been actually to the point of reaching energia and actuality. But both energia and dunamis both critique the speaking of the right by the government that speaks the right as law. If it has not fully integrated the judicial validation that the state has performed, then it is open to criticism and revision and challenge from the state aspect of universality, from that intersubjective communal moral whole, and it will have to take on that pressure of being pressured for revision if it has not fully integrated the democratic and the universal dunamis and energia of the state. So it's very much a pause here by Kojeve to tell us that what he wants to reveal to us in Volume 2 is the concrete as speech. So he corrects himself in a way, because the last lesson he was really starting to talk about the concrete aspect of French government, and he was really getting off track of phenomenology. He kind of corrects himself here, because now he tells us the concrete aspect of phenomenology is speech. You have the ideal of writing the speech act. You've got the concrete version of that writing of the speech act as speaking, governmental speaking. So now we know what concretion is. Concretion is speech act. That's a huge correction to some slippage that I saw occurring in the last lesson, but I think Kojeve paused. I think he actually paused and clarified and corrected himself here, and now he's back on track. Concretion equals speech act. And that takes us from 146 to 156.